Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Working?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me this time? Yeah.
And
good.
Welcome to this forum on university budget. We had undertaken last time to update you once we knew what the province's operating grant to us for 15-16 is. We learned that last week. And so we have a bit of an update for you this morning. It'll be shorter than the last one to allow for more time for questions. If I can just remind everybody, we move to the next one, for faculty, staff, students, alumni who cannot attend or who are off campus, we are recording by video and audio this presentation, and it will be uploaded tomorrow to the budget update webpage. So we need to remind you that your presence indicates your consent to have your speech and image recorded and made available from that public webpage for others to view. The presence of people in Saskatoon, PA, and other off-campus locations is very important to us as a university, and we want to make sure that they have the same access to information as people on campus. So if we move to just a couple of the key themes, every year our operating grant allocation comes to us in a letter from the minister. And in this year's letter, the minister identified key themes from the perspective of the Government of Saskatchewan for the University of Regina. And you can see them there. The government is keen to continue to see us emphasizing First Nations and Métis success. That is obviously attracting First Nations and Métis students to our campus, but also, of course, retaining them and graduating them as a key part of our institutional responsibility to the people of this province. Second theme identified by the minister is international education. This is obviously important to the province, and it goes both ways. International education in the sense, of course, of international students coming to our campus, and we all know that we've had tremendous and really very gratifying growth in that area over the past 5 years. But equally, from the perspective of the province, outbound mobility for Saskatchewan students. That Saskatchewan students get an opportunity to travel outside the province as part of their outside the country as part of their university education in the form of courses and international experiences. Accountability and sustainability. These keynote terms are, of course, being heard increasingly throughout the post-secondary sector, not just in Saskatchewan, but across the country. Governments are asking us to be more accountable for the public funds that we receive, and they're asking for that accountability in the form of reports and audits and all of the things that we see happening, again, in every jurisdiction across Canada. And sustainability. They're asking us to think about how we, as a university community, as one of many university communities across the country, can ensure that our structures and our costs are sustainable over the long term. And there's a quotation there from the minister's letter. Post-secondary institutions must work collaboratively and operate as an integrated system. What that means is that the ministry is asking us to look at ways, new ways perhaps, of partnering with the University of Saskatchewan and with Sask Poly. Big example right now of the partnership between us and Sask Poly is the nursing program, the collaborative nursing program, which serves nearly 1,400 students. We're also reaching out to the University of Saskatchewan to try to share teaching resources in areas of comparatively low enrollment and to put courses online or televised that we can share between the two campuses, but also in areas like purchasing and other kind of administrative functions that we as a post-secondary sector can do jointly rather than individually as a way of saving funds and redirecting those funds to direct frontline teaching and research. Turn it over to Dave now.
Good. Of course, one of the things that comes in the budget letter as well is not only some of the comments and cues for steering and priorities that the government has indicated that Tom just spoke to, but also the what we look closely at in terms of, okay, what's that mean to the bottom line in terms of the numbers? You may recall at our last forum that we were projecting a grant increase of 0. So the good news is that the grant increase came in higher. We got a 1% grant increase. Later on, we'll repeat some of the challenges and things we've got. Of course, our expenses are going up higher than that, but 1% is better than our last forecast. So we got a 1% increase in the operating grant. There was also the use of the Saskatchewan University funding model between the U of S and the U of R, in that they monitor the activity changes, be they research, graduate teaching, activity levels, and of course one of the biggest one is the number of students. So we benefited from the changes this year to the tune of $422,000, and so that means a net increase overall in our grant of 1.36. There was also another investment that they made in specifically in a master's program in nurse practitioners. An additional 5 seats were added, so an additional $150,000 added to our base grant to specifically enable that program. So if we were to take a look, and this is part of our challenge, if we were to take a look at the trend line in terms of what the government grant has been over the last number of years, of course it's been decreasing a little bit. We understand, as the President mentioned on Budget Day, there's a significant challenge throughout the province, actually across the country and things. In relative terms, we're doing fairly well. As a province, to get a 1% increase is better than most of our counterparts across the country, and of course lots of them are still waiting for the budget impact, such as in Alberta. If we were to take and illustrate, we talked an awful lot about this in our last presentation in terms of what our real challenge is. So what we've done here is we've taken and tried to illustrate it in one chart, where the gold part at the bottom is that same line that you saw in the previous slide. So exactly the same line in terms of the government grant. So this is the grant increase that we get each year. So the amount of money in gold. But our challenge is our expenses. And this one, we've just isolated one aspect of it, and that's just salary and benefits. And so the salary and benefits line is indicated by the black. And so the difference, therein lies our challenge. So over the past number of years, as you've seen, we've been experiencing reductions in real purchasing power. Even though we've had increases in terms of real dollars, we've had grant increases every year, but our expenses are increasing by more than our grant increase is. And as a result, that is what makes our challenge. So we've got that difference that we have to take and make up each year. One of the other things that comes up in the letter, the old terminology was sustaining capital. The new terminology is plant maintenance and renewal. So some good news here as well. Of course, some of the trends, which I'll get to in a moment, are not necessarily in our favor, but we have got an increase. We'd asked for $11.3 million. As you know, the number of leaky roofs that we've got around, I don't think you can walk the campus without seeing some aspect of deferred maintenance that really needs to be addressed. And it's not just in the bricks and mortar of the facilities, but it's also there in terms of lab equipment and such that sits in the classrooms that we definitely need to increase as well. So the grant this year, just over $5 million. It was a 10% increase. We got an additional $492,000 as an increase in this particular part of our sustaining capital, or now plant maintenance and renewal. Another good news item is that last year, for the first time, the government set up a fund that universities could apply to, universities and federated colleges could apply to take and backfill key deferred maintenance projects. Last year, the amount of the pot was $2 million, and we got $400,000 of that. That enabled, you may have seen, those of you that have been using the gym would have known that the entranceway to the gym has been blocked off because we've spent $1.2 million to take and replace that roof. That project is just finishing up now, and of course the front door is open, but that $400,000 last year helped us go ahead with that particular project. This year that fund is increasing from $2 million up to $3 million, so if we were as successful, that might mean another $600,000 just in terms of the $400,000 that we got last year out of $2 million. Perhaps we might get $600,000 out of $3 million. So that's a good news item as well that will help us. But the challenge, of course, over the years, and this reflects on what we've been getting in terms of plant maintenance and renewal, and it doesn't reflect the inflationary costs, but over the past 2 years there has been a small increase, but nowhere near what we really need. So that's one place that we've been discussing extensively with government that needs to have an even greater investment.
So just a couple of slides now to tell you about scholarship funding and tuition Tuition, of course, is approved by the board. The board will make that approval sometime in May, but just a little bit of discussion framed by the news there that you can see that the SIOS scholarship funds at $573, mostly, though not wholly directed to grad students, is unchanged. The SOS at $540 for undergraduates is unchanged. A little bit of an increase in support for international education, and that is largely, again, for outbound mobility, students from Saskatchewan getting an opportunity to travel outside the country, and the rollout of the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship into the 4th year, that is students now for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, continues. If we go to the next slide, our tuition and fees are in the bottom third of the English-speaking universities in Canada. At the same time, and I need to stress this, we are very conscious of the financial pressures that students, both undergraduate and graduate, face. We know of students who are working 25, 30 or more hours a week to help pay their tuition and to make ends meet. We also know that we have a particular challenge on the graduate front, and we've had some very articulate input from graduate student representatives in various fora and on various committees reminding us that graduate students, particularly research graduate students in areas like the Faculty of Science, are not able to access the kind of support that they would be able to access if they were at, say, the University of Alberta or the University of Lethbridge or other universities. And so it's something we need to look at very seriously in making recommendations to the board for not just tuition rates, but also for allocation of student support and scholarship funding, especially at the graduate level. Our graduate student population is now about 11 or 12% of the total campus population, and given the patterns we've seen over the past couple of years, it could grow as far as 15% within the next 3 to 5 years. We don't know for sure. So, this is a slide very much like the one you saw last time around, and let me just walk you through it. That tuition dividend from 14-15 is an amount of money that we're carrying forward into 15-16, into the new fiscal, because of higher than expected enrollments, largely on the international side. So that dividend was unexpected funding or unexpected revenue generated by higher than expected international enrollments, and we're going to put that into the New Year's budget. We now know that our operating grant increase, as David said earlier on, is about 1.6. If we just say, and this is purely hypothetical at this point, we've not made this recommendation and the board has not approved any tuition, but hypothetically, if we put in tuition rate increases averaging 3%, that would generate another $1.88 million. And if we budget for an enrollment decline of about 1%, we do this quite conservatively, and the reason that we would do that is that our areas of growth now are largely full. Nursing is full, engineering is largely full, and the prospect of continued growth like that in the next couple of years, such as the growth we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years, is very small. So conservatively, if we see a decline in enrollments of 1%, that will take $568,000 off the bottom line. So that all factored in, hypothetically, going into the new budget year, we could have $3.4 million of additional monies.
One of the problems is Tom hasn't worked hard enough. He needs to get that number a little bit bigger, because let me tell you, walk through the same slides as last time, basically on the expense side. So I don't think any of these have changed, other than the fact that we've added in the one-time revenue of the $150,000 in the master's program for a nurse practitioner. So now we have to add it as an expense. So otherwise, the numbers, I believe, are the same that existed before. So they are, of course, the biggest one. The salary and benefit increases each year, and of course these are negotiated collective agreement settlements. We now know, of course, what the IRFA one is, and we have to take and project what APT and other settlements might be, but it comes out to $6.8 million. Utilities is how we had labeled this one before. We've got it actually broadened a little bit, but $150,000 or so there. Master of Nursing, as I just spoke to, $150,000. And you'll notice, for those of you that weren't at the last presentation, that we recognize that there's some places in this university that we just have to invest in. So this is a fairly random number, it's a guess, a bit of a forecast, just recognizing that there are some places that you have to invest, even in an era when you're cutting in other areas, that it just makes sense. How much we invest, we don't know. But in this one scenario, we've plugged in $1 million. If so, the increased cost, the sum total of all of those, $8.15 million. The good news part, you may recall last year we had the voluntary incentive program for retirement. The uptake for that program was far greater than we expected. It helped us soften the blow, as you recall, last year. And last year we were able to invest significantly in a number of different areas, but in particular in research and in teaching. And so that blow was softened. Well, we're going to experience the secondary wave of that this time. The good news part of it is that by not filling a number of those additional positions that were vacated, we'll end up with savings of $600,000. But the bad news and the painful part of it is that there are a number of different positions that just will not be filled. And these are, of course, colleagues and workers and things that have already retired and gone, but that we won't be able to take and backfill. There were 51 total positions that were vacated. We've so far backfilled 18 of them. So 7.55 is our net number. So the two numbers, the one at the bottom of Tom's chart, and if his number was bigger, we wouldn't have this problem. Or if my number were smaller, we wouldn't have this problem. But the reality is the combination of both is where our challenge is. So we've got about a $4.1 million challenge to take and balance the budget over the next couple of weeks. I say the next couple of weeks, we have been working on it, of course. It's a year-long cyclical exercise to take and build and work on the budget. Lots of input from a variety of different forums. We had some good feedback from the last forum, and later on we'll be asking you, of course, we're opening it up to questions in a moment here, asking for questions, and some of the input we get here today will help us. Some of the input, if you're willing to send some emails and things like that into us, we'll be able to use that as well. But over the next couple of weeks, we need to take and form that budget. If we were to take and look at the $4.1 million in terms of across the board, across all units, and we will not be doing this, like, let me emphasize, we're not doing across the board cuts, but just to give you a sense of magnitude, that if it were, then that's a 2.9% cut. Now, again, if you were at the forum that we did last month, then you'd recognize that this number was, I believe, 3.8% was the average cut, and the shortfall was about $5.8 million. So already things are getting a little bit better, but still 4.1 is still a huge challenge. So let me just repeat a little bit, or Tom, go ahead. This one.
So we'll get this video up on the budget update page probably by lunchtime tomorrow, together with a slide deck. Your input is welcome both this morning. And I remind you too, if you want to come and ask questions or offer comments, there's a microphone there and a microphone there. And those things will be recorded as part of the video and available again for viewing tomorrow. But we've also got a special email address there, budget@uregina.ca, and we've had some very, very good input from people to that. This is something that we all need to come together and work on. The challenges are real. There's no question that we do have a budget challenge. And I know it's irritating sometimes to hear this, but as Dave has pointed out, our budget challenge is actually not as severe as that's seen at many other Canadian universities in other jurisdictions. The Alberta budget is coming down, I think it's next week. I think it's it's the 28th or 29th. And everything that we're hearing from Alberta suggests that our sister institutions there will face a much larger challenge. So this isn't to mitigate ours, but to say we need to see it in context. And as a group of colleagues, faculty, staff, APT, QP, students, alumni, the whole university community, we need to come together and work on how to address this challenge. So with that, thank you for coming this morning. The floor is now open for your questions and comments.
Sylvain. I have a few questions here, so I'm going to take some time. What will happen to the College Avenue campus, because there was no new money for that in the provincial budget?
Sure. You're absolutely right. There was no allocation of any funding for the College Avenue campus. We've had every indication from government that they recognize and support the project itself. However, in terms of funding, this being a difficult and challenging year, there is no specific funding allocated for it in this budget.
So are you going to take money from the operating budget from the OR to help the campus?
No.
So what's going to happen to it for this coming year?
Well, this coming year, we'll continue to do the fundraising. There's an extensive campaign to do fundraising. We'll continue to operate and maintain the facility as best we can. There's an extensive, and as you'll see in some of the budget documents and things like that, the work that CCE is doing up there is absolutely incredible. They have been growing their revenues. In fact, the CCE contributions to our budget and to the bottom line have helped in each of the last number of years by millions of dollars that has taken and softened the blows to other departments. So that will continue on. It's business as usual up at College Avenue campus.
Though for people who work there, of course, there are maintenance issues. We're well aware of those. The other issue that I think we should mention is that there are many employees at College Avenue for whom we have no space here on the main campus. So it's not simply a matter of thinking we could close College Avenue and move everyone here, or move people to rented space, which has its own expenses and is only a temporary solution. So as Dave says, try to keep the place going until we're able actually to start the work. And the contribution of CCE to the university budgets, that is the surplus that CCE generates, flows back into unit budgets to the tune of, I think, about $6.9 million right now. So it's very important to help us sustain the operations of the line faculties and other units on campus.
Will the new residence project affect the operating budget in 2015, 2016?
No, the resident project is on budget, on schedule, proceeding. We will be opening it in September. I've heard every indication that, in fact, occupancy and things like that is as projected, that we'd be, of course, able to provide another 605 beds for students. So another 605 people living on campus, 605 affordable housing units that then will be freed up in the city of Regina, or in the region someplace, which is good news for the entire region in terms of affordable housing. And of course, the government has been a good partner on that so far and has contributed $11 million towards that project.
So just a reminder too, Sylvain, that those operations, the residence operations, are part of ancillaries sitting completely outside the operating budget, which is what we've been talking about this morning.
The government provided an additional $150,000 for nursing.
Nurse practitioners.
Nurse practitioners, yes. So will that be enough for the program, and will that affect the program financially?
It is a specified amount for 5 additional seats, so we'll recruit those 5 additional people and teach those 5 additional people. So the budget, yes, will be sufficient for that purpose. And it's targeted funding specifically for that. We can't use it for other purposes.
You quoted the government in one of your slides, and it recommends for institutions that they must work collaboratively and develop an integrated system. So what's your vision at this point? Does it mean like to eliminate redundancies, or
to eliminate
redundancies? Like if you have the same program in both campus?
No. I think initially what we're looking at is some efficiencies and some meaningful collaboration. Let me give you one example in the library. The system that you all use when you come into the university library's online catalog is called Voyager. It's getting near the end of its useful life. Bill Skrzuti and his colleagues in the university library are working on a new discovery layer. And we're doing that in collaboration with Sask Poly, eventually with the University of Saskatchewan and with other provincial libraries, so that we can share the cost and have a common discovery layer, which will enable users in each of the institutions to have access to the holdings, online holdings of all institutions. So that would be one example. I know Dave will have an example, say, on procurement or purchasing.
Sure. And in fact, this is something that I think Saskatchewan has always been good at. We're always taking share. Institutions in general do a good job of sharing between institutions, but I think we even do it better in Saskatchewan. And we've been doing it for a long time. But there's been a number of different deputy minister level initiatives and things like that to really sit down and try and see what sorts of things we can do better. Tom mentioned one on the academic side with libraries and things. There's a whole procurement group that is looking to take and extend things that we even have always done and even do them better. So for instance, U of S and U of R have always partnered together in terms of the economies of scale of buying natural gas and negotiating prices for years. We've done that together. Well, why not include look at ways to take and include the colleges, the regional colleges and Sask Poly, etc. Things like procurement cards and things. We do those things together already. And so how can we take and make purchases as a larger group, as a bit of a consortium, and do it better? So lots of working groups in there, lots of good examples of things that have already happened and ones that we'll continue to do.
Add to that too, if it's helpful, in programs like business, obviously there's a College of Business up there, a Faculty of Business Administration down here. Both are very, very healthy enrollments. And the deans in those two units actually collaborated in developing an advertising campaign that went national to bring students to Saskatchewan. So the essential idea there was we advertise collaboratively to let Canadian students know about the opportunities in business education at both Regina and Saskatoon, and say to the students, choose one or the other according to the kind of program that you want or the specialization that you want. Education is similar. Our Faculty of Education, which is a very fine one, has certain areas of emphases and certain kinds of curricular structures that the University of Saskatchewan does not. In areas where we can collaborate a little bit more closely, we've seen that happen. I'll give you one example. Physics is sharing teaching resources so that there's a very highly specialized course in upper level physics that's taught down here. It'll be made available perhaps by television or online to students at the University of Saskatchewan and vice versa. Or if we've got an academic in the province who has an area of really, really specialized expertise, in the past we've seen that person offering a course that is available to students at both campuses. It makes good sense.
So did the government give you, let's say, a kind of a description of what they're expecting by what's called an integrated system?
I think we've just described what our interpretation of that system is, that we try as best we can to share public resources to the benefit of all.
One last question here. So you said there won't be cuts across the campus that is going to be discussed and so on. So have you developed criteria for budget allocation, or is that going to be discussed?
We have a series of criteria that have been discussed publicly in fora like CCB. We need to think through now in very specific terms, now that we know what the grant is, and now that we see roughly how we believe enrollments will be tracking this fall. It's very early, by the way, if I can just digress for a moment. We don't know our enrollment levels for the fall yet, but we do know what our application and acceptance rates are across the operation, and they're looking all right. So guessing that enrollment would be, say, somewhere between -1 and 0 or flat, we can now begin sitting down as a group and thinking through very carefully what the implications are for achieving that efficiency figure.
Well, do you know at this point if there's going to be an effect on APT staff members and sessionals?
Did I answer you?
I guess the question could be in other ways, are there going to be layoffs and things, if that's what you're asking for. And in terms of layoffs, much like we did last year, in terms of we made a commitment last year that we'd be trying to do this. At this stage, you may recall that the president was on record of we'll try and treat people as humanely as we can in terms of, and not avoid layoffs as much as we can. And then ultimately last year's budget solution then was head the voluntary incentive program, which was of course quite friendly, sort of a voluntary incentive program. We won't be doing another voluntary incentive program this year. It doesn't work in quick succession like this. It'd be a long time before we'd have the ability to do another one. But our principle of treating our most important resource humanely will still stand in terms of we'd use every effort through attrition and normal retirements and things like that to deal with the reductions. There's absolutely no doubt that a cut of this order of magnitude does impact positions. I spoke a little bit in terms of the impact just of the follow-on of the voluntary incentive program from last year. A number of those positions that just won't be filled. And as a result of this budget, I think, same sorts of things. There will be impact on positions in so much as we can work with attrition and things like that. We'll be attempting every effort to try and avoid layoffs.
And just to answer your question on sessional, Sylvain, a faculty budget, take the Faculty of Arts, the Faculty of Business Administration, Faculty of Nursing, whatever, the vast majority of that budget is locked up in the salaries and benefits of permanent staff or tenure stream staff, people who are there for the long term. So an average faculty budget might be 90 or 92% going to the salaries and benefits of permanent employees. The sessionals are paid out of the discretionary money, which has, of course, been shrinking as we've tried to protect the core, spending on salaries and benefits of core. So we don't know there yet what that's going to look like. We do know that there will be opportunities for sessionals via CCE, because, of course, CCE operates on a very different basis, on a cost recovery basis, and is able to do things that a line faculty perhaps cannot because of its budget structure.
Will the, let's say, directives for cuts be coming from central, or are you going to, let's say, delegate the cuts to the faculties, like you're going to ask faculties to?
We will be working starting on Wednesday morning with a session with the deans to talk about this collaboratively. At some point, a formal recommendation from the budget advisors goes to the president, and the president recommends a budget to the board for approval in May.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions? Kelly.
It's me again. I just thought I'd say a few things. I just wanted to say that I'm very impressed at the exceptional, gifted people that we have at this institution, and congratulations to Dave Malloy and Thomas Chase on your reappointments. And I'd also like to say that this is something we can all work through together. And I think we play one of the more important roles in our society, because we're all working towards the goal of making a better world by empowering our students to become productive and constructive people in our society. So we're playing a very important role in what we do, so take pride in that. And I know we'll get through this, because inevitably we have to. Society has to go on, and post-secondary education is essential for a society to exist. So. And I just issue a little challenge to our governments, and I know there was a slide presentation there that was shown with the term accountability, and I'd like to kind of challenge our governments and our federal government as well, that it's very important that they be accountable with their tax dollars too. And I know back a number of years ago, Stephen Harper came through with making the working poor go from 65 to 67 before they get their old age. And at the same time, I was told by the media that the federal politicians were getting $12 of our tax dollars going in to their pension for every dollar they put in. And I was kind of disappointed with that. And I want to say that if Stephen Harper is able to kind of turn the Senate around, I'd gladly volunteer in there for free, because I get to retire next year with a $20,000 a year pension, and I'm excited because I'm one of those few people in Canada that actually can have a pension. So I'm thankful for that. So thank you very much.
And maybe if we got an elected Senate, we'd all vote for you too. So.
Thanks very much for that, for Kelly. And you know, just as you were speaking, something occurred to me that I think I'd like to say. You know, the post-secondary sector is in competition for public funds with K-12, with highways, with justice, and the elephant in the room is healthcare. Saskatchewan's budget next year will be over $14 billion, and of that, I think it's, what's the precise figure for health? It must be close to $5 billion. And I do want to say that post-secondary education, Kelly, as you have said, is extremely important, not just for the formation of young people, for the formation of intellectual capital, renewal, innovation, and all those things. We can also do things to reduce the burden on the public health care purse, thereby freeing up some resources that can be used in places like post-secondary. And I want to give a shout out to Darren Kandow in kinesiology, who's sitting over there. Many of you would have seen the piece in the Leader Post the other day about his research on bone density in elderly women. The estimate is, I think, Darren, it's Saskatchewan alone, The cost of hip problems, bone problems because of lack of bone density is $700 million a year. That's more than the operating budgets of the University of Regina, the University of Saskatchewan, and most of Sask Poly together. Bone stuff for Saskatchewan. So if research like that Darren and his colleagues and graduate students are doing can actually reduce the drain on the public purse, the university is then playing another very important role in society and perhaps freeing up some of those resources so that we can do more of that. But thanks, Kelly. That's a wonderful comment. It's as quiet as church.
More mics.
It's like church.
We'll bring the mic to you if you want.
We discussed the advisability, if it ended early, of taking a collection before we went, but
Can you speak a little bit more about investments that you're looking for in the next year? What are the types of things that we're looking to invest in to grow and things prosper next year?
Let me begin, and I know Dave's got a list as long as his arm. We invested 2 years ago, and you've heard me say this before, I think in the previous forum, in a new program in the public policy school called the Masters of Health Administration. So that program was targeted at mid-career professionals, many of them out there in the health districts, who want to upgrade to a master's qualification. We business cased that very carefully. We put some resources into the public policy school based on what we thought we would be able to earn in tuition. So we thought it was a reasonable investment. Our colleagues in the public policy school made it into more than a reasonable investment because they more than doubled the initial enrollment projections with a much larger than amount of revenue coming in from tuition. That program is now across the country. It has students in, I believe, if somebody from JSGS is here and can correct me, I'll stand corrected. I think it's every province and territory in the country we have people taking the MHA. So on the academic side, without neglecting the core, without neglecting humanities and social sciences, we have to find ways to build programs that will attract students in the numbers that we need to attract them. We sometimes in university circles, Pat, hear the phrase bums and seats. All we care about is bums and seats. We don't. We care about the people who are attached to those posteriors. But at the end of the day, every university has to have a certain level of enrollments if it's going to be financially sustainable. And when we have drops in some areas, very serious drops in some areas over the past 10 years, and not just at Regina, but across the country, we have to think, what do we need to do to attract the students who will actually make the place fiscally sustainable? So that's one example from the academic side. Dave will have something here.
Hey, I'll give you some more examples. The term investment might not be the right term, in that the places that we have to take and invest are really places that we're taking and spending some additional money. They don't necessarily drive an immediate return like some of the particular examples, but there are places that we need to take and invest for a variety of different reasons. So probably the best way to take and look at examples is to look at where were the investments over the past couple of years. And so last year we made a significant investment in research, in part as a result of a number of different reports and things like that that said, okay, we should be investing in there. Invested in some academic positions and things because we heard that that was an area of investment. To look at another specific example, we invested in web security and protection in terms of just the number of hacking attempts that a university takes and gets involved in any particular day. Thousands and thousands a day of people trying to hack into our private information insurance numbers, be it research or personal information and things, and to be able to take and protect against that requires an investment. So the term investment is in the broadest sense, like where we can't just survive by taking and making up the difference by cutting. We do recognize that there's places that we need to take and invest. So in the broadest sense.
Speak loud enough.
Okay.
The new residence project.
Hey, we're taping it, so if you could come down. So even though we can hear you and hear the people on the tape won't be able to hear you.
You guys had mentioned that the new residence project to actually build it and everything was separate money that has nothing to do with this budget. What about the operating and maintenance that's going to start in September? What's the plan for that? It just can't come out of nowhere, right?
Yeah, it'd be the same principle. So the business plan for any ancillary, but the residence is a perfect example. There will be heat and lights and toilet paper and custodial and maintenance, electrical, you name it. Every aspect of running a building will be necessary to take and run the residences. But it won't be an impact to the operating budget at all. Those are built-in expenses as part of the business case of running a residence. And so those will come out of the residence revenues that come from renting it out. And so the mortgage costs, the heat, lights, and operating costs all form part of the base budget of ancillary services. So they do not cross over at all. And similarly, if we were making profits in it, the profits from an ancillary don't go into the operating budget either. We have a principle of keeping them quite separate. And so all of those expenses will be part of residence operating, not the university operating budget.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, thank you.
That's a great question. It's provoked me to add something else. One of the things that we began to think of with colleagues in the bookstore and John Smith and his team is what the increasing advent of digital resources is going to mean for bookstore operations for the next 5 to 10 and 15 years. And two, when you look at the burden that students are facing, a student who's taking a full load of, say, arts or science courses at Regina, 5 a term, so 10 in a year, is paying about $7,000 in tuition. Textbooks can increase that by up to $2,000 or $3,000 a year, depending on disciplines. So we're encouraging people to think more and more of what are called open educational resources. Faculty can look at these, they can evaluate them, they're peer-reviewed, faculty are free to change them. And if they choose, if they think that these books are appropriate, these digital books, they can assign those to students in place of the conventional, expensive paper text. So we need to think through on that side of ancillaries what that operation is going to look like 5 to 10 years from now as the whole landscape of publishing and educational publishing shifts beneath our feet. That's another thing in the area of ancillaries.
Great questions. Room for lots more.
We've either bored everyone or...
They want to get back out there and solve the problems.
Well, again, thank you very much for coming. If you can give us, and we mean this very sincerely, if you can give us your input via that email address or phone us or stop us in the hallway, we need to hear every good idea we can get as we move through this fiscal challenge. I'm very confident that we can do so. As somebody who's been around this place for a few years, I know we've had similar periods. The early 90s was a period of great financial squeeze, and many of you will know some of the early stories of Regina College days back in the 1920s that Jim Pitsula in the history department has written about so well. The place has been through harder times than we're facing right now. That's not to mitigate or downplay the challenges that we face, but I remain confident, and I know my colleagues remain confident, and the board remains confident, that working together, we can solve these issues. So thank you again for coming. Dave, any last words?
No, just similar comments. It's, we know that it's always difficult and things, particularly when it comes to even workload and things. You've seen colleagues or whatever that have left on voluntary incentive program and wondering whether how you're going to take and make up those workloads and things. In many ways, we have to work differently. There need to be and there will be service level reductions. And so things that we're asking of each other, be aware as you're asking those things that might be a place that there was a unit experienced a cut. And so the amount of response, the level of response, the type of response and things like that might have to change. So we need to be thinking about where are the best places to take and reduce some of the services as we take and reduce some of our expenses as well. So keep that in mind as well. But otherwise, we talked long enough that we drew another question out.
It's not just about this year. And I say it as someone who wants to be here for a long time. Are we going to have this conversation every year? And I know we are. So how are we thinking about the long term?
Let me give that a shot, Mark. If we were in this room back in '92, in actually even more pinched circumstances, that same question could have been asked, and we'd say, yeah, it's not a one-year problem. Then things changed. The economy changed, and all of a sudden there was more investment in post-secondary, and we went through a period such as we saw in the graphs in the early part of this decade. They were actually quite generous, universities. Now we are in a more constrained phase. Is it going to end this year? I would be very surprised if it ends this year. I think the days of +4 or +5 on the grant are probably behind us for a while, but who knows? Do we need to treat this as though, is your real question, as an isolated instance? No, we have to think through the implications for 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road to do it responsibly. Should add too, oh, one more question while Tanya's going up. We should add too that our plan for the next forum, I think, is Wednesday the 6th of May. The board meets on the 4th and the 5th of May, and we're planning a forum like this after board approval of the budget on the 6th. If you want to note that, you'd be welcome to come then.
I wonder also that this is a lot to digest perhaps for some people that haven't been thinking about it, and I wonder if there's interest in another forum prior to some of the budget decisions. And the second comment is related to Mark's. I think he brings up a really good point, and if we look back at some of the flush days, you know, if we look at the budget as a long continuum that goes far back into the past and far into the future, then this is not just you know, we approach this as a year-by-year exercise because we have to, because the budget comes in, but perhaps we can look at some retrospective. So in flush years, how did we spend money, and was that a good way to spend money, and did that feed into protecting us in years that were lean? So perhaps that's something that we can think about as a community, to reflect on the past and the future, and perhaps let the past play into future planning.
Thank you.
Sorry. In terms of input, another forum and things like that, we can always entertain other questions and things like that. In terms of input, it's critical that all of the input come before Easter, basically just working backwards in terms of putting together the detailed calculations and things like that. Most of the key decisions are done and complete, and the calculations starting and the writing of the documents and things like that started, because all of that goes to the board about the period of mid-April, and of course with Easter in there. So end of the month is a good target. Any suggestions in terms of inputs and things like that received by then can definitely be factored in. In terms of looking at it longer, I know those are the sorts of things that I think of as I take a look at it and sort of reflect back in terms of how the campus has changed. And if you take a look at, there's a number of different places where you would have seen some projections. In the last forum, we had a slide up that had a decade's worth of data on, say, teaching loads and things. I know when I sit down and talk with the facilities folks, and I think some of the charts we've seen in some cases sort of show the size of the campus growth. And so if you take and look at the actual change in the footprint and things. If you were in information services and things like that, you look at some services that were back a decade ago that didn't even exist. Things like wireless wasn't on the horizon. So zero money spent on wireless now. The amount of money we spend and the number of different wireless points and the importance of something like wireless now, of course, it's off the charts and things. And so those are the things that we do take and reflect on. But I think it brings up a good point in that, so what, even using some of those examples, what things are we doing now that are perhaps a bit ancient and historic that we shouldn't be doing anymore? So things like publishing the calendar, publishing the phone book and things, those things are either dying off totally or are disappearing. Things like electronic paychecks and things like printing a paycheck. We've gotten an awful lot of grief from some people who like the old-fashioned way. Well, these are some of the painful decisions that we're going to have to take to provide the efficiencies to take and make the savings that we need, is to take and actually change the way that we do business. And so I think looking to the past is indeed a smart thing for us to be doing.
Hi, actually, I do have one question. I'm glad you brought this slide up. It would be valuable for us to maybe be able to look at the differences on the operating grant increase and everything, but in the salary and benefits provision specifically. How much of that is over this period of time, how much of that has changed from when it was originally, for each type of professors, sessionals, APT, and out of scope?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good point. And in fact, you may not have seen it. Some people in this room have seen it. And in fact, we have published, I think it's a 10-year time series on exactly that. That sort of shows the history. And as I recall, the charts are in a couple different ways. We can reproduce them and put them on the website. But in terms of they say that the percentage of salaries in each of those categories, so QP, APT, out of scope, IRFA, and things like that, the historic trends in terms of where they change. Because there's a number of different myths out there, and everyone takes and interprets them in different ways and things. So I always think that data is helpful. And so that has been shared with different groups, like the original AGP and things as a blended group. CCB has gotten a number of different information like that. But our goal, and in fact, one of the government's goals and things like that is accountability, transparency. And so more and more we've been putting things up. So if that's one of the bits of data, and if you haven't, to save you drilling down, because it's there, it's on the website, but if you haven't been part of those committees, you probably wouldn't be able to find it. So we can produce that. Good questions. Should we keep talking in case you come up with something else? Or have we drained?
What happened in Saskatoon?
So the question was, if you can't hear it off camera, it was what happened to the budget at the University of Saskatchewan? And Dave was just talking to his counterpart there yesterday, the day before, so you've got the latest.
On Friday. Let me paint the picture of all of the different areas and things like that. In terms of the universities across the board got a 1% improvement in their operating grant. The federated colleges got a 2% increase in their grant. Regional colleges got 1%. SIIT, a bit of an anomaly, a small budget, and I think some special programs. I don't know the details of it, but I think got a 24% increase. So the simple answer is for U of S, they got exactly the same thing as we did. The 1% plus the treatment of the changes in the funding formula. One thing that you may have heard that's a little bit different in the news and things, and once their letter goes up online, which I believe Advanced Education. Joe, do you know if they're up already, or? It's up already? Yeah, so they're online. You'll read another bit of anomaly that there was a $20 million one-time non-allocation. I think in different places, in one place it's called a reduction, other place not being allocated, which is sort of a unique one-time thing just in terms of the cash flow situation up there in terms of money that they were able to take and not be spending at this particular time. But in terms of the basic operating budget and allocation, exactly the same thing up at U of S as here at U of R. What time is it?
We've got 5 minutes.
Last chance. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate this, and thank you very much for your questions. Any other questions or input, send us an email. We're tracking this constantly, and it'll help us in our deliberations.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.